today, Mr. Dwayne Bradley. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone, or whatever time zone you might be in. Good day. I'm Dwayne Bradley. As Ruth said, I'm Vice President of the Houston Pro Chapter of SPJ, Society of Professional Journalists. I'm mainly a radio journalist. I do write, but I mainly have worked in radio. I served as general manager at the Pacifica Radio public radio station in Houston for 15 of the last 20 years. And I currently, and for many years, have been producer and host of a radio magazine program called Open Journal, which actually airs noon to 1 o'clock every Wednesday. So somehow I will be in two places at one time here shortly. I also am an adjunct professor in the communication department at the University of St. Thomas. And so it's my pleasure and honor to be the moderator for today's panel. Happy to serve in that capacity. I think we're going to have a really great hour together. A couple of ground rules. If you have a question for any of the panelists or all of them, post it into the chat. All of the panelists and Ruth and I will be seeing those as they pop up, and we will field them and sort them and get to as many as we can over the course of time we have together. The general schedule that we have, each of our four guest specialist experts will be presenting and telling stories and sharing what they will for a period of 5 to 10 minutes. We'll go through all four of them, and then we'll start sorting through questions and engage in conversation and see how much we can get through in the time that we have before you all get back to your busy lives. So happy June. Welcome to hurricane season, and welcome aboard to the Covering Storms panel, a co-production of SPJ and the Houston Chronicle. So the subtitle for this is Staying Safe and Getting the Story. And that's kind of what I would like to frame it as we go through our panelists, for them to share their story, and maybe share a story about being safe, but certainly about how they go about getting their stories. And we would like to start first with Emily Foxhall. She's a staff writer covering the environment for the Houston Chronicle, joined the paper back in 2015 and was part of the Chronicle team named a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for breaking news back in 2017 for coverage of Hurricane Harvey. So thanks for joining us today. Emily Foxhall, it's yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I see some familiar names, but for those of you I don't know, I've been on the environment beat about 2 years, but when hurricanes hit for us, it's all hands on deck. So I've been helping to cover storms since 2015, and I'm from Houston, and hurricanes used to be something like we looked forward to because we have school. So we just got to stay home and like read books, and I'm kind of a nerd, so that was fun for me. But being out in a storm obviously is a much different experience. So I'm really happy that you guys organized this, because preparation really will change how you feel about doing this, I think. So I wanted to share two stories just briefly. And the first is a story about how not to do things. That would be when I helped cover Hurricane Harvey. This may be a Houston problem, but so often we see storms coming when you're from here and you're like, we'll be fine. It's not actually going to hit us. I'm sure Matt Lanza is like crying right now, but I have definitely learned to heed meteorologist advice. So I was not prepared for Harvey at all. And I ended up getting sent down to cover that storm in the it at night. Like I drove out in the dark. I covered Fort Bend County at the time. So I went from Houston to Richmond, which is about a 45-minute drive. And I had just thrown whatever food was in my closet into my trunk. And I don't even know if I had water with me. I definitely didn't have like towels or enough clothes. I just was not prepared at all. And so I'm driving out on 59 in the dark, and it starts to rain really hard. And the police came and shut down the highway in front of me. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is just, your heart kind of plummets and you start to get a little shaky. And, that was just, any amount of preparation I could have done before that would have prevented me from being in this very scary situation. So we have a tip sheet I would love to share with you all. Hopefully we can email that to everybody, but there's just like really basic things. Like when you know a storm is in the Gulf, you should be prepared to have a place to stay. That night I ended up sleeping in a Red Cross shelter, which I shouldn't, I was taking space from somebody who really needed it. And so you should find a hotel that you're going to stay in and book it out for a number of nights, because you don't know how long the storm is going to last. And, everybody in that whole region who floods is going to end up needing a hotel room. So if you have one booked out, that will be helpful. And it's useful to ask them if they have a generator or a backup power plan. And you should have food ready to go. You should have water ready to go. We have a list of the things now that we tend to buy. So I won't bore you with that because you can just look at that. But some tips on that is like, it's nice to have little treats. Like I now get pudding packs. So I have a little sugar to get me through. So it doesn't have to be quite so miserable of just like bread and peanut butter nonstop. So anyway, I ended up getting through Harvey fine, but I was like begging someone to bring me clothes, and I had to stand in line at Walmart for 2 hours to get food, and like all of that could have been avoided. So if there's one thing I can leave with you, it would be, you just need to prepare for your own sake emotionally, and you don't have to waste time worrying about these things, and you can focus more on what you're there to do, which is to report and to tell stories. So by contrast, when we covered Hurricane Laura a couple of years ago, I was like ready to go. So the things we always do, we air up our tires, we fill our gas can, we have our food and water ready, and we had a plan for where to stay. So you kind of know, I don't know if Matt's going to address this, but like you kind of vaguely know where the storm will hit. So we had a plan for where we were going to be. And I made a point to source with the first responders in that area. So we had a place to sleep in a high school cafeteria that was hurricane proof. And so we knew we were going to be sleeping in a safe place. We knew at the least we would have first responders to go out with to get access for storytelling. And there's so many tips I could give. Like you should write down all your sources on a piece of paper so you have that ready to go, the phone numbers. You should know sort of vaguely how you're going to get around to tell stories. Going to the shelter is always an okay place to interview people, but it's such a balance. Like you want to stay safe, but you also want to get to the places where you can tell your readers about the devastation that's happening as these storms hit. So I would say always prioritize your safety. Like no story is ever worth the risk to your personal self. But you can be smart about it. There's people who want to help you get safely to where you need to be to talk about what's happening. So sourcing ahead of time and sort of understanding where places flood, I think that'll go a long way. And maybe I'll stop there, but these are tricky because they're hurricanes can either be a rain problem or a wind problem. So Harvey, of course, was a rain problem, and we had to figure out how to not flood our own cars. But Laura was a windstorm primarily. And so there's hazards of power lines being down. And I guess my last thought would be, you're in a disaster zone. Like Laura was so clearly a disaster. We couldn't get in contact with the police if we wanted to. So you don't want to add to their problems. Like, you don't need to be getting yourself in trouble. So yeah, I guess I would say to trust your own judgment, be as prepared as you possibly can for these circumstances, you know, to be self-sufficient and do your job. And I will stop there.
All right. Well, thank you, Emily. And thanks for 2 really good stories in what I found in my front yard this morning. I also enjoyed this picture that Brett took of the Weather Service 2-year-old hurricane map with all the big lines on it.
That certainly will take you right back to how that felt that summer.
Yeah, that was, thank you for that. I appreciate it, Emily Foxhall. Our second presenter panelist today is Matt Lanza, who's the managing editor and forecaster for Space City Weather. It's an area weather blog. My go-to weather blog, actually, because it's hype-free forecasts, and that's, I think, trademarked. Matt has about 20 years experience forecasting, and he has a bachelor's in science. He's a meteorologist, studied at Rutgers University, which takes him back to my roots in Jersey. So Matt Lanza, thanks for being part of this today.
Yeah, Dwayne, thank you for having me here. It's good to be here and to talk with you all. And I think it's kind of interesting to be sitting on this panel, which is kind of cool, actually, for me to learn from some of you as well, because, you know, I'm not a journalist by trade. I'm a meteorologist. I'm a scientist. I'm an expert on weather, and I forecast. That's what I do. I just happen to be okay at communicating the weather. I try not to give myself a lot of credit. I guess I'm pretty good at it. It's worked so far. And, you know, I've just kind of have a natural ability to take all the stuff that I look at every day to make a forecast and translate it into a language that is, you know, a little bit more understandable to just to average people, which is kind of what our goal is. So, you know, I can't give you necessarily tips on, you know, covering it in the field, because it's not what we do. We smartly stay back because that's how we are. We have to keep people informed through the storm. Harvey was, I really hope, a once in a lifetime thing, because that was a marathon, unlike anything that I think I would have ever expected, just covering weather at all. And it was just kind of interesting going through it. And what we decided, I think, sort of on the fly, and what I decided on the fly was, okay, we have to give people information. People are suffering. People are desperate to know, you know, when this is going to end. So it was sort of like, okay, let's just walk you through the next 12 to 24 hours and let you know what's going to happen, because there's a 5-day storm. So you just kind of break it down by pieces, because otherwise it just becomes so overwhelming. And we try to give people a little bit of, you know, positivity, a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. And that seemed to work with us. And I think it speaks to having empathy for your audience, which is one thing that I have discovered, because people in Houston are just so traumatized by weather. And anytime it rains, you still get questions. I mean, anytime it rained, even after Harvey, I'm a meteorologist. I know what's going to happen if it rained in the middle of the night. I woke up and I checked the radar on my nightstand to make sure that everything is going the way it's supposed to, because you just have this feeling in the pit of your stomach that you know, something's going to go wrong. So if I feel that way, I can't imagine how other people feel that way, feel in that situation. So, you know, we discovered that empathy was kind of a very big driver for how we do things. And as Dwayne alluded to, we do stick to no hype. That's one of the things that work for us, is to just kind of be boring most of the time with weather, which sounds counterintuitive if you're trying to get an audience. But, you know, for you, it's different than for us. You know, we try to stay on the sidelines until we're needed. And then we can step in and make things. But I think it does actually bring up a good point. I know a lot of times people like to, I've seen media everywhere where they'll write weather stories and sometimes just sort of makes something out of nothing almost. And I feel like that people are a little tired of that. And it's good to sort of just make sure that if you are going to go in that route and write about a weather event that might happen, just make sure it is what it is. And for that, I would say, get to know your local National Weather Service office, or get to know a meteorologist in the community. And Emily can tell you, she's ping-ponged ideas off me before, and I've talked to her and given her tips and told her about certain things. And if you find somebody that you can just trust, it's almost like a source, but it's a meteorologist. I think that's really important because they can give you context. And if you're on the fence about writing about something, you can ask them. I can tell you the folks in the National Weather Service are great. Sometimes they may seem a little distant and a little, I don't want to say cold, but that's just how it is. But there's always going to be one or two people in those offices that are willing to talk and want to help, because they want the stories to get right too. They want people to get the correct information. They are very much public servants, and that's what they're out to do, is to get good information to the public, and you are viewed as partners in that process. So it's very important to just try and find somebody that you can get a good relationship with, that can answer some questions for you. And anytime you have a weather question, you can go to them and ask them that. And then the last thing I'll say, one thing that I'm kind of big on, or at least to become bigger on after Harvey, it took me a very long time to just sort of get back to a baseline level of normalcy after Harvey, just in terms of how I felt every day. Make sure you're taking time for yourself. We talk about this. We've started to talk about this a lot in the meteorology community. We're dealing with these disasters and forecasting them constantly, but then there's a lot to that, and it takes a toll on you. And some people in our community have actually started referring to some meteorologists, particularly like at the National Weather Service and things like that, almost as frontline workers, first responders in terms of weather. And don't kid yourselves, you are too. You're out there in the middle of this. You need to take time to make sure that you're able to process everything and just find other people that have gone through this and talk to them. I was able to do that after Harvey. I talked to a couple of meteorologists in Oklahoma that had been through some tornadoes, and other people that have been through flooding events, and just kind of got to know a little bit more about just how to process it. And there's no right answer. You just sort of, it just sort of happens. And it was very helpful though. So make sure you're doing that for yourself and while you're covering things. And I will say the one thing that really just stuck with me was after Harvey, I didn't read a lot of comments in our blog, but there was one person whose comment I read in the days after Harvey. And basically he said, I have a bunch of belongings on my lower floor, and I was sort of on the fence about what I should do ahead of Harvey. And then I read what you guys wrote and how serious you were in your tone. And it spurred me to move that stuff to my second level. And lo and behold, the first level flooded. And that saved me a whole bunch of hassle of having to replace all that stuff. And that really just stuck with me as just a microcosm of what people are trying to make decisions off of in the middle of these things that they're going to be going through. And, even if you can help one person to take it more seriously than they would have prior, that's a win. And that's very good. And that makes you feel good after coming out of those sorts of storms. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to take some questions a little bit later.
Fantastic. Thank you, Matt Lanza. And just a reminder to everyone on this, if you have a question pop up, either to one of our specific panelists or just a general question, feel free to pop it into the chat, and it will get sorted by the panelists and myself and Ruth, who is hosting this gathering here today. So our third panelist is John Shapley, who is a staff photographer as well as video journalist at the Houston Chronicle. He joined the Chronicle in 2015. He is also a native Houstonian, so he has a pretty good life perspective on this season. John, welcome to our Covering Storms panel. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I see some colleagues, Karen, Elizabeth, Joe. Karen, Elizabeth have covered as many storms as I have. Their input is also quite valuable, but I really want to echo what Emily said about preparation. We, as a photo staff, have gone all in with preparation. We pretty much, in the mindset I think you need to have is you're going to be camping essentially for an undetermined amount of time until your editors, decide it's time for you to come home. And so that is often 3 to 4 days, could be 7, could be more. And so, you really need to have everything from like toilet paper to sunscreen to a way to bathe, water, food, ways to charge all your batteries, all that stuff. And there's a lot of things that I think we as a staff have figured out, mostly through trial and error, and also through the guidance of a couple people who went through Hurricane Katrina. That has helped us a lot. And so I want to give my email address to anyone who's working in the field and has questions about particular things with gear and how to what works, what we found that works, what doesn't. But it's JON.SHAPLEY @CHRON.com. It's just my first name, period, last name @cron.com. Reach out to me with any questions you have. If I don't know the answer, I'll ask someone else on staff and we can try to figure it out for you. But so preparation was key. I went to East Texas to cover, I don't even remember what the storm was, to be honest, but basically I was at a bank taking a picture of the president or something, and then Jill called me and was like, hey, you're going to go to Beaumont. So I'm like, okay, cool. And I knew that the interstate flooded at a particular underpass, and I knew I had to try to get out of town before that happened. And so I left, and this was a really bad decision, but I left with what I was wearing and the things in my car. And what that meant was I got into a town that night that had no service, no electricity, nothing was open, and I had no change of clothes, no way to charge my batteries, nothing. And I wound up eating dinner at I ate like 4 bags of Doritos at a gas station, and I found a couple bottles of water they hadn't sold. And Jill, bless her heart, my boss, lined up a place for me to stay with her sister after I had called every hotel in the area and it was all full. And so like that preparation goes a really long way. And what happened is I came home once all my batteries died. But the first time I tried to come home, I couldn't because I was flooded in. And so like you kind of, you don't really know how these things are gonna unfold. And so like be prepared to be out there for several days, more or less on your own. Be prepared to be out there without cell signal too. That's a big one that we run into all the time. Analog maps are good. I was actually with Emily for Hurricane Laura, and the other thing I think that's really important is there are all kinds of ways to get hurt while covering a storm. It's not just the wind, it's not just the rain. We were on our way into the city from the shelter we'd slept in, and we were driving, and then on the highway there was like a cloud drifting, like a lightish colored cloud drifting at a low level over the highway, and it looked out of place, and I didn't know what it was, but I could see it was coming from a chemical refinery. So we stopped and rolled up our windows and turned off our AC intake and drove through it. Well, later on we found out it was chlorine gas, and so like there's all kinds of things that can hurt you. Like I've been stung by ants, I've been bit by a dog, and it's not always the most obvious stuff. You can step on nails. It's gosh, I could talk for hours about gear and footwear and all that stuff. And so really, please, if you're out in the field, definitely reach out to me ahead of time. But the other thing I want to echo what Matt Lanza said is take time to take care of yourself some way, because in order to be effective at what you're doing, I think you need to you can't be out the edge of a breakdown, the whole time, which is often, if you're working that many hours, not sleeping, just working in that environment, it's really taxing on you. And so just maybe that means just hitting pause for an hour. Or maybe it means doing meditation before you go to bed, or whatever it looks like for you. Try to take that time. I didn't appreciate that until Hurricane Harvey, when I was at a clinic after I'd been bit by the dog, and they took my blood pressure, and it was really high. And that's that moment that I realized, like, oh, like this is affecting me. And so there's a lot of, since then, I kind of, how do I say it? I've made it more of a priority to take care of myself. And the result is I think I'm a better journalist for it. I think I'm more able to relate to people and talk to people and convey those stories if I'm taking care of myself. So I'll hand it off.
Okay, John. I'm getting repetitive advice here that harkens back to my youth in the Boy Scouts back in New Jersey and out in California. Just be prepared. And I also like the concept of self-care. If you can't take care of yourself, it's going to be hard to do your job effectively and be effective in sharing any information with anyone else and helping them. So thank you for that, John. Our fourth panelist today is Mark Schleifstein. He's an environmental reporter with the New Orleans Times-Picayune, also the New Orleans Advocate and NOLA.com. His stories on Hurricane Katrina were among the Times-Picayune stories honored with the 2006 Pulitzer Prize for Public Service and Breaking News Reporting. He's also the co-author of the book Path of Destruction, The Devastation of New Orleans and the Coming Age of Superstorms. Welcome to the panel, and thank you for joining us, Mark.
Sure, thanks. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to start out with some geeky stuff first, tips on where to find information, and then we'll get into the more personal stuff. First thing I'm going to do is point out our office at the National Hurricane Center. Maria took over today, and the previous person has retired as of today. So it's a pretty interesting scenario for folks who are going to be calling the Hurricane Center today to figure out what the hell's going on. I'm going to flip around a little bit, if I can get to my screens here, which I'm having a problem doing. Hold on a second. Okay, I see what the problem is. It's behind here. Give me a half second here. I apologize for this. Okay, so the other thing I'm going to show you is a really geeky weather guys website, spaghettymodels.com, that has a lot of the stuff that you're going to want to do if you're doing basic stories on hurricane forecasting. This is Mike's weather page, and you can find everything you were looking for just about on here. Although I would recommend that you go directly to the National Hurricane Center site to get your official forecast information.
Mark, I'm sorry, I'm not sure we're seeing this website.
Oh, hold on a second. Let's see.
Thanks, Ruth.
Let me share it again. Hold on. Uh, There we go. Okay, sorry about that.
Quite all right.
Does that work?
Yes.
Okay,
Excellent.
great. And hopefully this is showing up. Yeah, that's Mike, just so you know. The other thing I'm going to talk about for a second is NWS chat. And I'm assuming that some of you may already know about this, and I've got the wrong version up. Hold on a second. NWS Chat is a service that the National Weather Service provides. Mostly, it started out for emergency managers and for TV forecasters, and it's everything weather going on. It's messages that are sent out immediately by the National Weather Service's local offices to both of those groups of people. Several years ago, at my request, after I complained about it repeatedly, the head of the National Weather Service agreed to allow print reporters to join this as well. And I would urge you to just go to NWS Chat Weather Gov to figure out how to sign up, but it will get you in with forecasters real time, where they are talking about what is actually happening. And the emergency managers are also reporting to the Weather Service local offices what's happening on the ground. And that can give you a couple of seconds to a couple of minutes better understanding of what's going on in advance of things going out on Twitter or on the website itself. It's fairly easy to use. I try to keep my mouth shut on it. I don't participate much other than when there's a real serious question that I need to ask a forecaster's there. I'll just call up the local National Weather Service office for information. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing now and just talk about things that I'm aware of. I've gone through numerous hurricanes, unfortunately. The first one I covered actually was in 1979, Hurricane Frederick on the Mississippi Gulf Coast when I worked at the Clarion Ledger in Jackson. And it was one of my first lessons: be prepared, know where the hell you're going before you get there. I drove all the way to Pascagoula and ended up on the waterfront in a big parking lot with waves coming over it from the hurricane after I made my way there, and no idea where the hell I was. Fortunately, there was a National Guard Jeep there screaming at me, telling me to get the hell out, and he brought me to a shelter, and I bedded down at the shelter and reported everything. The second lesson I learned that night was crack your car windows open, because the back window of my car blew out because of the difference in pressure as the eye went over Pascagoula. The other thing I learned was that stories come to you if you're in a shelter or if you're in an emergency operations center, which is where you should try to get if you're going somewhere on the coast that's near storm surge issues, both for your own safety and to make sure that you have a way of getting information out. That became a real issue. I tried to get that message across when I joined the Times-Picayune in 1992, when Hurricane Andrew hit. We sent a team to Morgan City, and I told them, you need to go to a shelter. And they didn't listen. They went to a motel, and the roof of the motel blew off onto their car. They were stuck there with no way of getting around, no way of getting their information out. And the stories weren't happening anywhere near them other than the fact that their motel was damaged. If they had gone to the emergency shelter in Franklin, which is where most of the people in Morgan City ended up, they would have been where another disaster occurred, which was that the roof blew off that shelter. No one was injured, but it was a big story, and they would have been there and they would have had a way of getting their information out. So that's one thing to know. The other thing I'll point out is that your preparation should begin before hurricane season begins. And the first thing you should do is make sure that you personally and your family have plans for what you plan to do during hurricane season when you have to go cover a storm. And part of that is making sure that you are properly insured, both your vehicle and your home, whether it's rental insurance or homeowners insurance. If you're anywhere on the coast, I would urge, whether you're in the X zone or not, or whatever the hell it is with the new FEMA 2 rating system that they got going on right now, you should get flood insurance because it'll be very important for you in the event that there is a storm surge event or a rainfall event like what occurred during Harvey. In my case, during Hurricane Katrina, my house was flooded with 15 feet of water. I also planned ahead for that and put a lot of stuff on the floor on my second floor. Unfortunately, a lot of that got flooded because the water was higher than the second floor of my house. So things that were in my attic were safe, but or on beds were safe, but stuff that was on the floor was sort of a disaster. The other thing to remember is that you should be prepared to be away from home for a very long time. We didn't get back into New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, which happened on August 29th, until August 10th. Until October 10th. We were able to get back into our home a couple of months after Katrina, but it was really just to figure out what the hell happened. The flooding lasted a long time, and the ability to do our jobs required us to be far away for quite a while. The other thing about that was when it became clear to our managers at the Times-Picayune that they told everybody we're evacuating the building that we are in that was being used as our shelter. And you can take one bag with you on the back of a delivery truck where we're going to stick everybody because they had stupidly made the building open as a shelter for 250 people, both the staff and their families, everything from newborn babes to people in wheelchairs, which became a real problem. I looked at what I had and decided to take the bag that it had all of my equipment in it and left everything else behind, which I was able to pick up in October when I came back. So we ended up in Homa immediately after the storm the next day, worked there overnight, and then moved to Baton Rouge, and was lived in 9 different locations between then and the next February when we finally bought a new house. So make your plans, make sure your family knows your plans, make sure you have contacts outside of the area, out of state better, where you can trade information as you find out what's happening to you that can be given to your family members so that they won't be worried about what's happening to you. I'll stop there and let's move on to questions and answers.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mark. Looking at my clock here, I see we have less than 20 minutes before we will conclude this gathering. So I'm jumping into the chat. If you have specific or general questions, anyone, just put it into the chat and we'll find it. Our first question goes to John Shapley. John, did you primarily shoot still photos or videos? And did you or any of your photo staff mates shoot drone photos or videos of the devastation you've encountered?
Sorry, I was muted. I think it depends. We as a staff try to operate. If it makes a good video, we try to shoot video. If it, I think our default is still images. Tricky thing with drones is it's often like after the storm moves through, it's often still pretty windy for a period of time. And so use your judgment on, I actually crashed a drone a couple weeks ago. It fell out of the sky. And so like, I don't know. I'm still not sure what made that happen. But so with drone, I mean, yeah, there's definitely a place for drones, particularly if you're trying to show a wide expanse of physical damage. Absolutely. When we go cover storms, we'll go, for instance, Laura, I think there were 4 of us who went into Louisiana, and we had one or both of the drones, I can't remember, between the 4 of us. And so the hard part is if the cells don't work, you know, how do you communicate with someone to get the drone? But whoever has it, I think it sort of falls on them to do that. Video is really useful, and this is as a visual journalist, for interviews. If you meet someone who is in that zone and wants to talk, video, because it's, I think that the human voice will convey a lot about loss and suffering that images alone may not. And so like video is a really useful tool for that. I'm trying to think of what else. One thing I forgot to mention earlier on is what's key, I think, to getting those images is getting there quickly. For Laura, what that meant was we were first out of the shelter in the morning behind the rescue workers, but like, and I think we were the first from our Chronicle team to make it into the city. And another photographer actually, and this is a decent idea, he slept in his car in a parking garage because Laura came ashore as a monster storm, and there aren't a lot of buildings built to withstand that, but a parking garage I think was pretty safe. So like part of the preparation is figuring out where you're going to stay and then how quickly you can get out and where you need to go in order to get those images and video and so on. I hope that helps. I'd like to add one more thing. So this is geared towards visual journalists. Like part of what's going to happen immediately after the storm is police are going to set up roadblocks. There's a lot of chaos and confusion and just general disorder. As a visual journalist, I'm not advocating breaking the law in any way, but you can kind of take advantage of that in order to get where you need to go. So it's just something to keep in mind. It's part of the advantage of getting there very quickly. Mm-hmm. So again, I'm not advocating like driving through a roadblock or anything, but.
Okay, thank you, John. I'm seeing several questions related to I would say maybe an empathy issue that maybe Emily and Mark would be most, and you as well, John, would be most geared to answering. Any advice on approaching people, especially those from vulnerable communities after a storm or while embedded in shelters, people who have just experienced the devastation or even while it is happening? How do you effectively and empathetically engage in those types of encounters? Yeah, Emily, that would be great if you could maybe start that.
Yeah. I was thinking as we talk and as John was kind of talking about the self-care, I'll never forget during Harvey, I went to a woman's house and ugh, this still makes me emotional thinking about it, but like every item she owned was spread out on her lawn. I mean, her house had filled up with so much water, she had gone into the attic to stay safe. And so everything in her home was ruined, but she was trying to save it. And it was just like a whole lawn covered with items, you know, like her wedding dress, a Bible, family photos. And I don't know that she was able to save any of it, but you really have to keep in mind, like people are losing everything they own in their life. So you can't be more, like you can't err on the side of like, be as empathetic and slow and careful as you can. And I think most of us who get into journalism are empathetic people. So trust your judgment on that. I would say I do approach people in the shelters for interviews. Sometimes the shelter, the people running the shelter will kind of help facilitate that. And I would not be pushy around that. If somebody says no, respect that. I find that most people do want to tell their stories. There's some logistics of like, reporters and photographers will be different, but for me, I don't get on an airboat with rescuers because I can't hear. So I will often stay back to where people are being dropped off from boats. And I remember in Harvey doing one interview with a mom her kid had gone out on a little boat with his dad, and they hadn't been back for hours, and she was just sitting there waiting for him to come back. And so I sat with her in a car to stay out of the rain, and we just talked for 30 minutes. So I'd say, a general rule of thumb for me is it's better to talk to 3 people for 10 minutes than 10 people in 30. Let's see, I'm doing this math wrong. The basic point is just spend some time with people and understand that they're going through something catastrophic that they may have never experienced before. And there's a lot of loss. So I don't know if that's super helpful. I guess I would say just trust your judgment and don't push anyone into talking to you.
Yeah, if I can add to that,
Yeah, please.
one of the key problems that we thought we might face after Katrina was that my role was going to be investigating why the failure of the levees and walls occurred, and so I'd be talking to the Corps of Engineers officials about that, and they of course would be sort of touchy about it for obvious reasons, and it became clear that we had a hell of a lot in common. About half of the Corps staff in New Orleans lost their homes from Katrina, and 40% of our staff lost our homes. So we were able to literally compare what happened. What did you do afterwards? When did your family able to get out? How were you able to get them back into the house as quickly as possible or whatever? So those things help a lot. The other thing it would be really good to point out here is that trauma is a real issue after these storms for reporters, and it's not something that people should be just giving a second thought to. And I would urge reporters in their newsrooms, when trauma pops up its ugly head in the newsroom after a storm, that they urge their managers to get in touch with the DART Center for Trauma and Journalism to send a team down to meet with reporters and help them move towards that. We had to do that in Baton Rouge in our emergency operations area about a week after the storm, because our paper had brought in their paid mental health experts who told us to do jumping jacks. And the staff pretty much exploded at the stupidity of that. And so a couple of us reached out to Dart Center, and they had somebody down the next day. And by the end of the week, we had a trauma expert from LSU working with our staff as well. And we had significant problems in our staff, and it's something that you should be concerned about. We had a photographer tried to commit suicide by cop who was saved only because the cop recognized him. And would have been a great loss for us. And we had at least one mental breakdown that occurred in Baton Rouge immediately after the storm. So it's something to think about.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I know we're taking a lot of time on this, but if I can add to that, if there's any editors on this call, having a boss who was really understanding of how hard these situations are went a long way for me. My editors were never pushing me to get a story or pushing me to go somewhere I felt unsafe. And so I would encourage any supervisors to keep in mind that your reporters are in really dangerous and really emotionally trying situations.
thank you for that, Emily.
Can I add something to that
yeah.
real quick?
Yeah, and I've got a question for you after that, John.
Okay, so the way I start conversations with people is I walk up to them and I ask, how are you doing? How are you? Some variation of that. And that's always the first thing I ask. Just want to throw that out there. Like approach it as a human being and not as a journalist subject kind of thing. And just generally that's I think what you should be doing.
Thank you. Okay, so to follow up on that, you mentioned this earlier about in your preparation. One of the specific questions, what kind of clothing, what kind of shoes? You mentioned that. Rebecca asked because there's nails and glass, and do raincoats help? Is there something better than like raincoats? And dealing with fuel, like do you pack gas cans on the roof? You hitch it somehow? You throw it in the bed of a pickup? How do you deal with some of those things? What are the best shoes? Maybe that's a good first start.
So it kind of goes to a couple different ways. Like it depends on what kind of storm it is. If I'm walking through floodwater, I'm going to be wearing like army boots and pants. If I'm at the beach and it's windy and a little rainy, I'm probably going to wear a swimsuit. Honestly, I have given up trying to, I think, stay dry, and it's not going to happen. Keep your cameras dry, obviously, but put a trash bag over the seat of your car because it's going to mildew. If you're going in and out of your car, it's going to smell really bad on like day 2, day 3, day 4. Do not wear tennis shoes. Do not, if you're a woman or anybody else, like don't shave your legs, don't shave yourself, because you get tiny cuts. Bacteria gets in that, it can get infected really easily. But yeah, I would say it depends on like what kind of storm it is and what part of the storm it is. After the storm moves through, if there's standing water, I mean, go through it if you have to. I try to avoid it. Our staff is kind of split on the idea of waders. It's a safety thing, because like manhole covers come up and you can fall in, and that if you're wearing waders, like you're probably not going to come out. And so that's really dangerous. And so I would say, and this is sort of where we are, if you're going to wear waders, make sure, and you can test this in the store, like make sure you can get out of them like real fast, like really, really fast. And there's a way to walk through floodwater, which is sort of like dragging your feet to where they don't leave the ground. And then you can poke ahead with a stick or a monopod to see if there's a hole, because it's not just manholes either, like the road buckles, or like you cannot see under floodwater. Like I cannot stress that enough. There could be rebar or something, and all kinds of dangerous things. But yeah, I walking through floodwater is always dangerous. Let me just say that. And so, and there's snakes too. There's all kinds, there's ants, there's snakes, there's all kinds of horrible things that are ready and willing to hurt you. And so with gas, it's kind of tricky. the way, like in Laura, basically like a third of Louisiana or a quarter of the state did not have power, and there was no gas between like Lafayette and Beaumont, basically. And so like we had to drive back to Texas each day to fill up our tank. The way we did it during Harvey is we pre-stationed, we got like several gas cans a piece, filled them and put them outside at our apartment. You know, I would not ever put gas cans inside your car. If you put them outside your car, know that they might get stolen by someone who really needs them as much as you. So the way I do it is I'll fill them ahead of the storm and leave them someplace as like a stockpile hidden. Definitely not inside of an enclosed space. If Karen is still on the call, she's a staffer, she might have some advice on that too, but.
Okay.
Well, I can just stress, I can't stress enough to be really careful at night. I mean, I got flooded in 2015 during the Memorial Day floods, coming home from a Rockets game about 2 a.m. It was playoff time. And the water came up so quickly in that car. And Steve Gonzalez, my boss at the time, told me to bust out the window with a monopod. I was terrified that I was going to be found by my colleagues, dead. To this day, I have PTSD. So I can't stress enough, don't drive, because you actually cannot see like that. That night, I thought I saw a hill, and I was in the Heights trying to get home, and I thought I saw a hill. It was actually a river of water that engulfed my car. So, and then there's times where you can't distinguish between a filled ditch and a wet street. And that's how people end up in ditches and die that way. Anyway, I'll get off now.
We don't, as a general rule, as a photo staff, operate at night unless we're already set up. We don't drive around at night. I just want to throw that out during storms like that.
And
Unless we
Dwayne,
have a really good reason.
Yeah.
sorry,
We
yeah,
do
we have a minute left.
Yeah, we do have a couple more questions, and sadly, we're really short on time here. So I would love to get more information and, like Mark's point of view on the effect of global warming and climate change on what's going on. But we promised everyone we weren't going to run you past an hour of your day. And I want to adhere to that. And I'm like seconds away from violating it. So with that said, I want to turn this back over to Ruth and to Caroline from the SPJ board. I want to thank all of you for personally, Mark, Emily, Matt, John, thank you so much for what you do and for being part of this.
Yeah, thank you so much. Caroline?
Caroline?
Hi, everybody. Just really quick, my name is Caroline Evans. I'm the treasurer of Houston SPJ, and I'm also the member chair. Some of you are probably wondering, at this point, why should I join SPJ? The fantastic program I just sat in was free. So what does membership do for me? I had kind of the same attitude up until one of my former colleagues a few years ago was actually held in contempt of court for refusing to disclose a source during a mirror trial. Right away, SPJ sprang into action, both locally and nationally, to support him through his appeal until that order was finally rescinded. And that's when I realized this was the kind of organization I wanted to belong to. Not all of us are crime reporters, and not all of us are going to be held in contempt. So membership does have other benefits. We have networking, both locally and nationally. We have on-demand skills training, and we have lots of discounts. Members get discounts on admission to our conferences, travel, insurance, and of course, the AP style book. So discounts are great, but let's face it, journalists and journalism need advocates now more than ever. Houston SPJ is proud to carry out this work, but we can't do it alone. So we hope you will join us in our mission to protect and promote press freedom. And we especially hope you'll join the Houston chapter. If you'd like to know more, if you're ready to join, if you encounter issues while joining, please get in touch with us. I've put our email in the chat So with that, I'll hand it back to Ruth.
Thank you so much. And the site to go to join is spj.org/join. Couldn't be any simpler than that. I want to thank the Houston Chronicle. I want to thank Jennifer Chang, managing editor there, for helping us put this program together. Unfortunately, at the last minute, she wasn't able to attend, but we really appreciate working with the Chronicle, and I hope you all enjoyed this program. And I kind of wonder if I don't know if the people who pose the questions that are still out there, and if the speakers are able to stay, maybe we can stay a few more minutes, but that's totally up to you guys. So I'm fine with it. But thank you all again, and thanks to the Chronicle, and thank you to all our speakers, to Dwayne, our MC, and to the rest of my board. So whoever'd like to go can go. And if you want to sign up for our newsletter, we do have another program coming up on Monday and other programs coming up. So put your email in the chat and it will come to us, the moderators, and I can add you to our list.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. Yeah, if any of you panelists are willing to hang, I'll get to the other questions. There's of course they're good questions. They just came in a little later than the others. This is one I had sort of sandbagged it, and I wasn't going to ask, but then someone did. So during a storm, how much effort goes into using social media for your reporting versus holding on to stuff for publication either in print or online later? Anyone want to grab that?
I never have cell service during most storms. So
I think I would say don't hold on to anything. I mean, it's a breaking news situation. People need to know it pretty much immediately, usually. And, we have a live blog that we usually run. So you might post on Twitter and also send the same thing into the live blog.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Mark, I wanted to throw this at you first. How has global warming and climate change impacted how you cover and report on weather, and how has that impacted your recommendation for the preparations checklist?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it really impacts the short-term preparations checklist, i.e. what to have in advance of a storm, but it really has a lot to do with insurance and with making decisions on whether or not you're going to stick around in a particular community. We're seeing sea level rise be a significant greater player along the Louisiana coastline in terms of surge heights. And so that's something that's going to be a continuing problem as we move forward. And then the rainfall is also affected by climate change pretty clearly, as we saw with Harvey, and also with a couple of other storms since then. So those are things to think about. You've got to cover it. We generally, in terms of coverage on a day-to-day basis, it will sometimes make its way into the daily story, but a lot of times it'll make its way into the broader issue story, looking at, a day or two after the storm hits, what were the causes? Why did it blow up? Why are things so hot in the Gulf of Mexico? Things like that. And those are, basically reporting decisions that we're making about how to make sure that people understand what's going on. In Louisiana, of course, it's equally significant that a lot of the coastal restoration program is aimed at reducing risk from storm surge from these storms, and it has a lot to do with climate change as well. So
I will add just a couple of things to that. I remember in the lead up during Harvey, watching weather model runs come in and just being like floored by what they were showing and thinking that, how could this actually come to fruition? And the one thing that I think has changed for me in the last few years has been that now I don't necessarily view the worst case scenario as an outlier anymore. The worst case scenario is what could actually happen. But you just have to be careful with it. And one thing, I think that's important is make sure that if you are, particularly if you're perusing social media, that the people that you see posting weather stuff, just make sure that they know what they're doing, because I remember during Hurricane Nicholas last year, which was seemingly innocuous in hindsight, but as that came up to Texas, there were a couple of weather model runs that showed it coming inland closer to Corpus Christi, more wound up as a hurricane, and then stalling out and dumping 45 inches of rain west of Houston, which would have been catastrophic. And the one thing that, as a meteorologist, I knew was, okay, that's a very unlikely scenario, just because it wasn't going to happen. Meteorologically, it didn't make sense that the storm was going to do that. So I could rule that out at that point. I felt a little bit better about things. But if somebody saw that, they would have panicked. Because there's sometimes these model runs get shared with just no context whatsoever. So it's really important to know that, but just recognize that, again, the worst case scenarios are very realistic. And one anecdote I heard at a meteorology conference earlier this year, there was a massive heat wave in the Pacific Northwest in Western Canada last summer. And, essentially it was off the charts. And the one of the researchers that had looked into it was like, this isn't a black swan event. This is a purple swan with pink polka dots. And that's basically where we're at right now, is that these seemingly, anything is possible. And I think you have to heighten your sense of reality a little bit now.
I also think like the way we communicate risk, and Matt, you could probably talk about this too, but like using the 100-year storm and the 500-year storm is pretty outdated now. Those flood maps are going to be updated this fall, or the draft maps are coming out this fall. So I'm still kind of playing around with how to communicate about, the rarity of these things. And the other thing that comes to mind is the infrastructure we have in Houston wasn't built for storms like this. So I pay a lot of attention to the Addicks and Barker dams and to the bayou systems here. And I just put a link in the chat that has links in it to where you can check those gauges. But I think climate change has really changed, exactly like Matt said, the severity is just can be much different than what we were prepared for.
Let me just quickly add to that since Katrina, our style is that whenever we talk about 100-year storm, we put it in the 1% chance explanation and follow it with a line that says the so-called 100-year storm, and often point out that there's a 26% chance of that event occurring within the lifetime of a 30-year mortgage. That provides a lot more understanding to the public, plus the fact that you also have to say that, and that chance is the same every year, which they don't ever get.
Okay. I have another question from Rebecca, SPJ president. She's up in Dallas. What can reporters in other nearby cities do to prepare for the effects of the aftermath of these storms? For example, during Katrina, I know Houston adopted a couple 100,000 New Orleanians, and others ended up in Dallas. And I have relatives who saw folks from New Orleans up in Utah. So how can folks effectively be helpful and prepare for the effects of the aftermath of these storms? I know we're not in those zones, but what would you advise, any of you?
Well, I'll just point out that there was real blowback on calling people refugees immediately after Katrina. I think it eventually became a term that gained more weight because it became what it really was. What we found was that this is something that's happening more and more in Louisiana and in other coastal communities, where we're seeing these short-term perturbations of population, people moving away, becoming much more long-term for a variety of different reasons. And these communities should understand that there may be significant problems with people getting back home, or what used to be their home, and or that they may find that, all of a sudden they've moved from a low income area of New Orleans to someplace in Dallas where they can actually find a job that's a hell of a lot better paying. That they ain't going to move. They're not, they're going to stick around. So you should be prepared for that. The other thing that we found in New Orleans after Katrina was that we had a significant number of people coming to the city, literally moving into the city to help. And many of them became long-term residents of the city, even though they started out as short-term assistants, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to see if maybe I can pull somebody else in here. John recommended that we try and uncover Brett Coomer, who is, well, he took this picture that I was looking at the National Weather Service. And many of the staff practices regarding safety are based on experiences. Brett, are you willing to unmute and maybe share? If not, that's fine. We'll just talk about you.
We'll talk about me. I was
Okay.
doing something.
Thanks.
What did I
Thanks,
miss?
Brett. Sorry.
I was getting some equipment for Jason. What did I miss?
Just wanted to, John says many of the staff's practices regarding safety are based on experiences you've had.
I mean, things
During Katrina. I
I
was thinking
shouldn't
of
have
Katrina.
done that
Yeah.
Melissa Phillip yelled at me for. Probably. I mean, most of the stuff came from what Melissa Phillip taught me or said don't do. Yeah. Wading in water is, like John said earlier, is precarious at best, but sometimes that's how we get there. Driving through water is never a good idea.
How did you unwind after Katrina? I think that's what I was.
How did I unwind?
Yeah.
I fell apart all the way home in the car. It was pretty traumatic, but as I just went home and I went to a concert on one, the night after I came home. But I think it's just a long decompress when you see so many things that you're not prepared for. With any kind of tragic situation.
I wanted to maybe expand on that. I don't know if you want to jump into it further, Brett, but I know an experience we had at KPFT with a drive-by shooting and the, largely volunteer staff of several hundred folks and many traumatized by that, seeing blown out windows in the studio that people sat in and did interviews and played records in and so forth. And we needed to resolve that really quickly and needed to bring in essentially like grief counselors, not just the Crime Stoppers people, but counseling services to help. Is there like a mental health component? It was touched on earlier, but is there that as a standard practice at, say, the Chronicle newsroom? And maybe Mark could address it elsewhere, but since most of y'all are Chronicle folks, do they take care of you in that way?
Yes, yes, they do. After Katrina, we were, I guess force is probably the wrong word, but we were encouraged and we all did go see someone that they got for us through I can't remember what the program's called, but yeah, I went a couple times and talked to them and it was helpful.
Mm-hmm.
there's no way to just, erase what you've seen. And I'm sure, John, since just getting back from Uvalde, will even, say the same thing, even though it's a different deal. It's, you're seeing a whole lot of things that you don't normally get to see. And we as photographers hide behind our camera. At least that's what I like to say during the event. But when you put the camera down and you're away from it, it really does affect you. Especially when people are going really tragic. Flooded house stinks for people, but it's not totally devastating. But flooded area where people are dying and losing everything, that, and children involved, that will really get to you.
Yeah.
And you gotta learn to pace yourself instead of going in so-called, blazing in. You have to pace yourself when you're trying to cover these things, and you can't run through floodwater or whatever. I know I tripped one time and drowned 2 cameras. So, because I was trying to go too fast to a scene.
Okay. Thanks, Brett. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
Thanks, Brett. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mark, you have a perspective from your side over on the other side of the Sabine?
Yeah. So you see, I switched my picture. That's a picture of me the first time I got back in my
Can I add something?
house and clean out the refrigerator, which was one of the problems. It had fallen open, and there was a bag of oranges in it, and everything smelled horrendous. In addition to all of the mold that was all the way through the house, we didn't get back for like 3 months, so all that stuff was just baking in there forever. Those are problems. I lucked out in that I did not have the mental health issues that many of those around me had. But at the same time, I have to tell you that as we moved into COVID, a lot of that stuff started falling back into my view because the control that I thought I had over myself, the fact that I was out there doing my job every day, which kept me away from thinking about what had happened to my house, was quite a bit different under COVID than it was prior to that. Stuck at home and working out of my house, and being quarantined and all this sort of stuff. So it's something to think about, and whether or not your organization is giving you the things that you need, you should make sure that you take advantage of whatever you can, even if you have to do it yourself. I still haven't done that on my own. I haven't felt that I've gotten that far, but I know that others have, and I've been pushing our guys, our managers, to make sure that stuff is available to us. Like I said, with Dart Center and things like that. There are organizations out there that are ready to help us.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Brett, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I heard something earlier about the debate about using waders. I never ever use waders, because if you trip, they fill up and they're an anchor. You're not getting out of them, and that's just a dangerous way. I mean, I know you want to stay dry, but there's no way you're staying dry when you're covering flooding. So why risk it?
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's 2 thumbs down for waders. Got it.
That's a personal thing. I know people wear them and they're fine, but it's waders. Just too many things can go wrong if they fill up.
Okay. All right. I think I've cleared the board on questions that have come up. Any of y'all have anything that's come up for you in these last minutes you want to share before we unplug and go grab some lunch or whatever? Okay.
It's
I'll-
lunchtime.
John?
Sorry.
I was gonna second what Brett said about pacing yourself. Like, it really is a marathon. especially if you're out there for a week or two or however long you're out there. I mean, it might feel like a race and a sprint constantly, but it really is a marathon. And just take that time to not go easy on yourself, but give yourself a bit of grace in those moments. And just remember that you have to be a good journalist, you have to be able to take care of yourself too.
Fantastic.
Can I also just say, sometimes you need to recognize that you have knowledge that may be useful to public officials. I found that out the hard way. After Katrina, a couple of days after Katrina, I got a call from EPA that the EPA administrator wanted to talk to me about this great plan he had for moving debris out of New Orleans to landfills all over the country. And I got on the phone with him and I said, no, you can't do that. And he said, what are you talking about? We're planning on putting it on trains and we're going to move it to these. We've got landfills lined up. And I said, no, you can't do it. We've got Formosan termites in New Orleans, and wherever you move that material, it's going to move the termites with it, and you're going to move Formosan termites all over the United States. So I single-handedly stopped that and created a major problem in New Orleans, which was, what the hell do you do with all of the wastes, the debris from the facility? And it ended up being a number of issues that blew up over the next couple of years, with landfills being started where people didn't want them and things like that. But remember that you have that information that they may not, and they may not understand what's going on. I'm reminded of the NPR reporter online with Mike Chertoff, when he's talking about how they're serving people. We've got water and everything that people need at the convention center. There's no problem in New Orleans. We know what's going on. But the NPR guy said, no, 10 blocks away at the convention center, there are people with nothing. They got nothing. And there's thousands of people people who are here, and they're nowhere near the Superdome. So that's something that, again, somebody who was on the ground and knew what was happening was able to provide to a public official that turned things around almost immediately after Katrina.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Okay, well, Mark Schlefstein, Emily Foxhall, Matt Lanza, John Shapley, everybody else, thanks for being here today. And thanks for what you do. And my takeaways, be prepared, self-care, empathy, keep up the great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much. This was a really great panel. I appreciate you all being here.
Thank you so much.
And take care of yourselves. That's what I learned too. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Ruth. Thank you, Caroline.
And Dwayne,
Thanks,
since you
Alicia.
ended up hitting the record button, since I forgot to, can you send me the file over ASAP?
Sure.
This is still on tape, so everyone has heard me say that, ask you that.
Got it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And I knew I was going to forget.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.